We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Heyam and Beis in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 75b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that according to Rebbe, there is a minimum shear in terms of the applications of the blood for karbanos. There's a minimum shear of the amount of blood, and the Gemara is now asking from Rebbe, because Rebbe says that according to Rebbe Eliezer, when it comes to the sprinkling of the mechatos, that's the waters of purification for Tomas Meis, so according to Rebbe Eliezer, Hazah kol shehu mitaheres, any amount of sprinkling will purify. Hazah einot tzricha shear, Hazah, the sprinkling does not require a minimum measurement, a minimum shear. And Hazah mechsa kosher or mechsa pasul, you can have Hazah sprinkling even if half the water is kosher and half the water is pasul. And the point over here is that if Hazah, if by the sprinkling of the mechatos there's no minimum amount, so that should be true also when it comes to the application of the blood. So why is it that Rebbe says there is a minimum shear by the application of the blood? And the Gemara continues and answers, L'devar of the Rebbe Eliezer ka'amar, Rebbe was only speaking according to Rebbe Eliezer. He was saying according to Rebbe Eliezer, there is no minimum shear when it comes to the mechatos, but there is a minimum shear according to Rebbe himself, and therefore there is a minimum shear as well when it comes to the applications of the blood. V'iba yasema, and the Gemara says another answer. If you want, we can say hazal l'chud unesina l'chud. These are two different things when it comes to the sprinkling of the mechatos. That is one halacha. When it comes to the application of the blood, that's another halacha. It's possible that by the hazah, it's possible that by the sprinkling of the mechatos, maybe there is no minimum shear. When it comes to the application of the blood, there is a minimum shear. Rashi explains, Hazah kol shehu mitaheres. Again, any amount of hazah is mitar. Chada milsahi. This is all one statement over here. Shazah kol shehu mitaheres. In other words, there's no minimum shear because any amount purifies. Now the Gemara later will explain why is it that he says to sprinkle two sprinklings if that's the case. V'hazah mechsa kosher umechsa pasul. Let's say sprinkling half kosher water, half pasul water. Kolomar. What this means to say is v'lo tema de hazah kol shehu mitaheres in im hataroves psul. Don't say that it's only true that the smallest amount purifies. That's only true if there's no mixture of pasul blood. Even if you have a situation where with the mixture you have some pasul water, kashera, so it's going to be kosher. Even if there's a mixture of pasul and kosher water, it is still kosher. Rashi says when it says here half, it says here half kosher, half pasul. That doesn't have to necessarily be half. Elaleko shear. The point is there's no shear. V'kasal kadaitach tehu adin lamatan damim. And right now the Gemara thinks that whatever applies by the sprinkling of the mechatos would apply by the application of the blood as well. And then the Gemara suggested that hazal l'chud and nesina l'chud or nesinas dam de mizbeach l'chud. Again, the application of the blood to the mizbeach, that's its own halacha. Tzarich shear, maybe there does need to be a shear. Sheyira hadam l'shnei ruchos hakeren shel mizbeach, because the blood has to be visible on both sides of the corner of the mizbeach, so that shows that there is a minimum shear. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Nisaravu bebechor u'maiser. Let's say an animal that's meant to be a korban, it gets mixed up with an animal that's a bechor, a firstborn, or an animal that's maiser behema. So then you allow the animals to graze until they develop a blemish, and then at that point you can redeem the kedusha off of the animal that was meant to be a korban. And now you have to treat all of the animals with the stringencies of bechor or maiser behema that have a blemish, in which case, again, you don't sell it in the marketplace, you don't sell it by exact weight. That's how you deal with these animals. And the Gemara says, Amar Rami Bar Chama says, Bechor leBeis Shammai. Let's say you have a Bechor according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, Ein ma'achilan l'nido. So the halach is that Bechor, if it develops a blemish, so then it's not supposed to be fed to nidos, to somebody who has that tumah. Rashi explains, Amar Rami Bar Chama, Pshita li bechor leBeis Shammai. It's obvious to me that a bechor, according to Beis Shammai, Afa pika shehumam, even though there's a blemish, uvizman hazeh nowadays, ein ma'achilan oso l'nidos. It's not supposed to be consumed by a nida. Tahachi tanya bebechoros beparakol psulin. That's a brisa in bechoros. So that we know that is the halacha when it comes to bechor, according to Beis Shammai. The question is, Temuraso mahu, what about the substitute of the bechor? Does that have that same halacha? And bechor eino nifta, bechor is not able to be redeemed. Again, the same question, Temuraso mahu, what about the substitute of a bechor? Would that have the same halacha? Bechor eino nishkal belitra, bechor is not we don't sell it again by exact weight. We don't weigh it by litra. So again, Temuraso Mahu, what would be the halacha by the substitute of the Bechor? Do these have the same halachas? Rashi explains, Eino nishkal belitra im hakohen mocher besaru. If the Kohen's going to sell the meat, again, it's not nishkal belitra. And Eino nifta, it's not redeemed. Lotzeis mitoras bechora lechulin, to leave that kedushas bechor, that law of bechor, to become chulin. V'lochel kedusha alamos, that the money should go on, that the kedusha should go on money. And so again, the question is, all of these halachas, do they apply to the tzmura or not? And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Bechor u'maiser, when it comes to Bechor and Maiser Behema Mishehumamu, from the point in time that they develop a blemish, Osin Tamura, even at that point in time, even when they develop a blemish, there is a halach of Tamura over there. If you create a substitute, it will have those halachas, Utmurasan Kayotze Bohen. And the Tmura, that substitute animal, will follow the same halachas. And so you see the answer to all of these questions is that the Tmura does in fact follow the same halachas as the Bechor. Rashi explains Mishahumamu, again talking about when they get a blemish, Osin Tmura means Af Mishahumamu. Even when they get a blemish, still there's a halach of Tmura, and again that substitute will take the same halachas as the original animal that was a Bechor or Meiser Behema. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rami Bar Chama asks the following question. Hitfis Bechor lebedek habayis. Let's say the Bechor is given over to bedek habayis, that the Beis HaMikdash will own it for its value, for the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi explains, Hitfis Kohen Bechor lebedek habayis mishumam. Let's say the Kohen, he gives over the Bechor once it gets a blemish. He gives it over to bedek habayis, that bedek habayis should be able to profit from this Bechor. So Mao sheyishkol belitra. So here are we lenient? What's the halacha in terms of allowing that we can weigh it belitra and sell it in that fashion? You're going to get a better price. Do we say Ravcha de Hektish Adif? Do we say that the profit of Hektish is preferable? O Dilmar, maybe Zilusa de Bechor, if we're more concerned with Zilusa de Bechor, that it will degrade the Bechor to sell it in the same manner that you sell the meat of any other animal. So that's a question over here. When the Bechor was dedicated to Bedek Habayis, maybe we should be more lenient. Rashi explains, Ravcha de Hektish Adif v'yishkal belitra. If we care about Hektish profiting, then we should allow the weighing it to sell it Kadeshi et Samse Mechira, so that way you could sell it by exact weight. V'yir budamav, it'll be worth more. To Hakaimel and Bashar Psulei HaMukdashim, because we do say that the halach is by other Psulei HaMukdashim, disqualified Mukdashim, disqualified Hektish. B'shvil shepidyono lehektish, we say since the redemption is going to go to Hektish, hey kilu alei, and we say we can be lenient. Lios neshchatin beitlis, it can be slaughtered in the marketplace. V'nim karin beitlis, and sold in the marketplace. V'nishkolin belitra, and it can be done by exact weight. That way, the one person who redeems it, you're going to get more money. Mitchila, you're going to get more money at the outset. Chutz min habechor. Now, when it comes to bechor, we don't allow that because there the increase in money goes to the Kohen. So the question is, now if it's been given over now to the Beis HaMikdash, now the benefit's not going to the Kohen, it's going to Hektish. So maybe we are lenient. And Rashi continues, O Dilma, or maybe we say Lo Dami, it's not similar because Hasam over there, Hanoas Riboy Hadamim, when there's going to be a benefit from that increased money that we get, Osa Kedusha Atzma, but it's going to be used for the same kind of Kedusha. Shemevin Bedamim Korban Kayotzebo, you're going to use that money for the same kind of Korban. So therefore, if it's already being used for the same kind of Korban, you're allowed to be lenient to get a little more money out of it, to get more value. But over here, Hanoas Riboy Hadamim, when we're going to get a little more money out of this Bechor that was a Balmum, to Kedusha Acheres, it's a different Kedusha, it's for the purpose of Bedek Habayis, so maybe we don't apply that logic in this situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Reb Yossi Bar Zavida, Reb Yossi Bar Zavida says, Tashma, come in here, the following proof. This is from our Mishnah. Nisa'arvu be'bechor u'maiser. Again, the Mishnah said that if the animals, they get mixed up with bechor or maiser behema, yiru ad shiyastavu, so you let them graze until they develop a blemish, as we said, v'yochlu kivechor u'maiser, but then they have to be eaten with the stringencies of bechor, with the stringencies of maiser behema, again, whichever animal they got mixed up with. And so, la'av l'meimer, doesn't this mean to say, di'eno nishkal belitra, that we're saying over here, that it has to be like bechor and maiser, that you're not allowed to do it by exact weight, even though in this situation, again, if we would do it belitra, there would in fact be a benefit to Hektish. Rashi explains, Lav l'meimer de'ein echad mehen nishkal belitra. You're not allowed to weigh it belitra. You can't sell it by exact weight. V'yaf agav de'ikap seda de hektish. Even though over here, if this is what we are going to do, there will in fact be a loss to hektish. Gabe pidyon shar hazvachim hamuravim, because we're going to be redeeming the other animals that were mixed in there. Shepidyon demeim lehektish, because what's going to happen? That redemption money, we're going to redeem these animals that developed a blemish, and we're going to use the money. We're going to give it over to hektish. V'kamar delom zalzalinon bebechor, but yet we're saying we're not allowed to degrade the bechor mishum hani because of that money. Alma mishum hachnami lo. So you see again in this situation of our Mishnah, we are not allowing it, even though that if we would be lenient, it would be a gain to hektish. And so over here as well, we should not allow it. That's the proof from our Mishnah. Again, isn't it saying in our Mishnah that it's not nishkal belitra? And the Gemara continues, Rav Huna of Rabbi Chizkiya, Talmidei de Rabbi Yirmiyah Amri, Rav Huna and Rabbi Chizkiya, they were students of Rabbi Yirmiyah, and they said, Mi dami, can you really compare our Mishnah to the question over here? Hasam over there, Shtei Kedushos, or Shnei Gufen, we're talking about two Kedushos, and we're talking about two separate animals that got mixed up. But over here, Shtei Kedushos, it is two Kedushos, because we're talking about the Kedusha of the Bechor, and we're talking about Kedushas Bedek Habayis, but V'guf Echad, but it's all one animal, and so therefore, you cannot compare the two cases. And Rashi explains, Hasam Beis Kedushos Beis Gufen, there it's two Kedushos and two animals, Hazvachim Shanaosan Lehektish, meaning you have these karbonos, these animals that are karbonos, the benefit goes to hektish, Hein Kedusha Levada, V'guf Levado, that's its own type of Kedusha, and its own animal. V'habechor Shadam of Lekohen, then you have the Bechor where really the money goes to the Kohen, Kedusha Levada, V'guf Levado, that's its own Kedusha, that's its own animal. Hilkach Lo Mezalzalinan Bahach Kedusha, the Hai Gufe, Mishum Ravcha, the Kedusha, the Guf Achroni, you can't be Mezalzel by the animal that's the Bechor, again the animals got mixed up here, but you can't be Mezalzel in one animal in order to benefit Kedusha, in order to have a benefit of Kedusha from the other animal to the other animal. But over here, Shtei Kedusha saying V'guf Echad, it's all one body, even though it's two Kedushos. There's Kedusha as Bechor, Kedusha as Bedek Habayis. You have involved over here the Kedusha of the animal that's the Bechor, and the Kedusha that's to Bedek Habayis, because the animal is being given to Bedek Habayis. So then we can make the argument, Toel V'ravcha de Hektish, B'hai Gufu, if the profit for Hektish is within this one animal. V'yaf agav de Kedusha Achrisi, Ozil, even though it's a different kind of Kedusha, maybe Mezalzalinan B'Kedushas Bechor to Hai Gufu, we would be willing to degrade, so to speak, the Kedushas Bechor in this particular animal. But the Gemara continues and says, Maskif lo Rav Yossi Baravin, Rav Yossi Baravin, he asks on this, Ma ilu amar haftu li bechor shetfisu lebedek habayis. If somebody would say, redeem for me this bechor that was given over to bedek habayis, klum shomen lo, would we listen to him? In terms of redemption, would we suddenly say that we're allowing it because of bedek habayis? And so therefore, just like we would not allow that, we're not going to allow a leniency in terms of nishkal belitra as well. But the Gemara says you can't compare the two. Haftu, you're going to say to redeem it. Rachman Amar lo sifta. The Torah says you're not allowed to redeem a bechor. That's a doraisa. So of course we won't violate that. But nishkal belitra is a more lenient halacha. And so the Gemara continues and says, Elo Amar Rabbi Ami. Rather, Rabbi Ami says, Klum hiknezel amasha kanu lo. Whatever the Kohen is giving over to Bedek Habayis, he's giving over whatever he himself has. And so if the rules are to the Kohen, the rules are that it can't be weighed belitra. So those same rules will in fact apply to Bedek Habayis. Rashi explains, Maskif la Rabbi Yossi Baravin. Rabbi Yossi Baravin asks, Mai kami boile. What's even the question? V'chi mishum hatvasaso mezalzelin on bay. Just because again he gave it over to Bedek Habayis, suddenly we should be mezalzel in the bechor. Umayilu omer haftu bechor. Let's say it would have said redeem the bechor. Zeh sheyatza lechulin mikdushaso ligazes v'liyavet. Again, we'll have it that it goes to chulin. It will leave its kedusha, and it can be sheared and it can be worked. If we would say that, of course we wouldn't say that. Sheitvisu lebedek habayis v'yir budama, because you gave it over to Bedek Habayis, this will increase its value. Klum shomin lo lavar al divrei Torah. Would we allow that to transgress a doraisa? But the Gemara says you can't compare the two. Of course, uparchinan haftu rachmon hamar lo sifta. The Gemara asks in terms of redemption. Of course you can't do that. The Torah says you can't redeem. V'al devora vein lavor. If the Torah says that, so you can't transgress. Avol lishkol belitra. But in terms of the halacha of lishkol belitra, ein kan avera al divrei Torah. Rashi Rashi says there is no doraisa over here, so there is room to possibly be lenient. But the Gemara said, Alamar Rabbi Yami, rather Rabbi Yami said, Hachi ikol amifshat lavayin. We can answer the question as follows: Klum hikna hakohen zeh lebedek habayis elamash kanu lo bebechor zeh. The Kohen's giving over what he himself has acquired. That's what he's giving to bedek habayis. V'keven de'etzlo lo huter lishkal belitra. If he's not allowed to weigh belitra, and yachol lahaknos lebedek habayis odef demeit simsum mishkal halitra. So he can't give that over to bedek habayis as well. They are not going to be able to get that benefit. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Hakol yecholim lehisarev, all kinds of animal karbonos can get mixed up, except for chatos and asham. And the Gemara says, Ma'ishna chatos v'asham. Well, what's unique about chatos and asham that it's impossible to mix them up? The ha'izachar v'ha'nekeva, because one is a male animal, meaning to say an asham is a male, and the chatos is an nekeva. That's what the Mishnah means, that those kinds of karbonos will never get mixed up. But still, chatos v'ola nami, we can say the same thing by a chatos and ola, because again, a chatos is a female animal, and an ola is a male animal. And the Gemara says, no, ikos seir nasi, there is the he-goat of the nasi, that is a chatos, which is a male, and therefore you could in fact have a situation where a chatos and an ola would get mixed up. But the Gemara then says, if that's true, if you have a chatos that's a male, so a chatos and asham can also get mixed up. But the Gemara says it's not true. Hai seyor v'hai tzemer, because when it comes to the seir of the nasi, that seyor that has straight hair, it means to say it's a he-goat, it has a different look than when you're talking about the carbon asham. So over there it's tzemer, these are animals that are like sheep with wool, and so therefore it's not going to get mixed up. Even the soyer of the nasi is not going to get mixed up with the asham, but it's possible for it to get mixed up with a carbon ola. The Gemara continues and asks, Pesach v'yasham nami lo mi'arav. Well, what about a carbon Pesach and a carbon asham? They won't get mixed up, because hai ben shana v'hai ben shtei shanim, one of them is 1 year old, the other is 2 years old. The Gemara says to that, no, ika asham nazir v'yasham mitzora. There's the asham of the nazir and the asham of the mitzora. Those are 1 year old ashams, and therefore they can get mixed up with carbon Pesach, which is 1 year. If you want, we could say the following answer: Ika ben shana demichzi ke ben shtei shanim. Sometimes a 1 year old animal looks like a 2 year old animal. V'ika ben shtayim demichzi ke ben shana. Sometimes a 2 year old animal looks like a 1 year old animal, and that's why it's possible that they would indeed get mixed up. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Asham shenesare b'shlamim, if a carbon asham gets mixed up with a carbon shlamim, Rabbi Shimon says, Shneim yishchetu b'tzafon, they should both be slaughtered in the north, v'yochlu kechamer shebehen, and they should be eaten like the stricter one among them, meaning just treat both of them like a shlamim. Amrulo, they said to him, Ein mevi'in kachim leveis hapsul. We don't do that because we don't bring kachim to a disqualifying situation. If you're going to limit the way that it's going to be eaten, so then it's possible it will become nosar, it's going to become leftover, and it's going to become disqualified. And so therefore do the same solution as we saw earlier in the Mishnayos. Again, they should be left to develop a blemish and redeemed, and then bring new animals with the money, bring a new shlamim and bring a new asham. And the Mishnah continues, Nesarvu chatichos b'chatichos. Let's say cuts of meat from one carbon get mixed up with cuts of meat from another carbon. Kachei kachim b'kachim kalim. Let's say kachei kachim type of cuts of meat with kachim kalim types of meats. Hanechon liyom echad b'nechon l'shnei yomim. Let's say it's meat that's supposed to be eaten for 1 day gets mixed up with meat that's supposed to be eaten l'shnei yomim v'layla for 2 days and a night in between. So what do you do over there? There's only one solution there. Yochlu kechamer shebehen. They have to be eaten according to the rules of the stricter among them. Rashi explains, Kechamer shebehen, again, this is talking about the Asham and Shlamim, so you follow what's stricter, which is the Asham, meaning Lezichre Kohuna, it has to be eaten only by male Kohanim, Uvi Azar, it has to be eaten in the courtyard, Uliyom V'layla, and for a day and a night, Kedin Asham, like an Asham, Ubal HaShlamim, Yotzi Yedei Shlamim, and whoever owns the Shlamim will fulfill his obligation of Shlamim. Sharei Kol Echad Yikriv L'mishu, because you're going to bring each animal for whoever the owner is, and again, just follow whatever is stricter. And then the response of the Chachamim is Lebeis Hapsul. If you do that, you're going to bring it to disqualification. Shememayit bizman achila shlamim. You're going to have less time to eat a shlamim than you really should have. Umevi lidei noser, and then it might end up coming to be noser, and that's a problem. Elayiru v'yimachru kedeleil. Rather, it's better to just let them graze and sell it, and then bring new animals with the money, like we said earlier. Yochlu kechamer shebehen, and then with the cuts of meat there, everybody agrees they should be eaten according to the stricter rules. Uvahar abonan modu. Here the Rabbanan admit as well. The lekot hakan ta'achrisi. You don't have that other solution again that you have earlier. You don't have that solution about letting them graze and then be sold, because here we're talking about the cuts of meat already from the carbon, and so that is not a solution. And the Gemara says, Tani Tana Kame de Rav, a Tana taught before Rav the following brisa, Shvius, when it comes to produce of the Shemitah year, Ein lochin b'dameh truma. You can't buy with the money from the selling of the Shemitah produce. You can't use that money to buy truma, mipnei shemematin b'achilasa, because you're going to lessen the amount of time that the truma can be eaten. Again, the same idea as the Mishnah seems to be saying, that you can't bring kodshim lebeis hapsul. Rashi explains, Shavias ein lochen b'dameh truma mipnei shememait bizman achilas truma. Because if you're going to use the money to buy truma, you're going to be lessening the amount of time that the truma can be eaten. Umevi alidei isra achila. It's going to end up coming to an isra achila where you can't eat it. Shetzricha shetisbar min olam, that has to be destroyed from the world. Kodem shetichla lechaya shebesadeh, before it runs out for the wild animals in the field. That's a halacha by Shemitah. Utruma zu mitvuas shar shnei shavuos. So now this truma was from crops from other years, not from the Shemitah year. Uzman achilas liolam. Really, the truma could have been eaten forever. Deilu shvias lav bas trumos u'maiserzi, because when it comes to Shemitah produce, that there you don't have halachas of truma and meiser by Shemitah produce, and so therefore over here, if you're going to take the money of Shemitah and you're going to use it to buy truma, then those restrictions are going to go on the truma, those restrictions that weren't there before, and that's going to be a problem, similar to our Mishnah of Mevi and Kodshim lebeis hapsul. That's what the brisa. What the brisa said that was taught before Rav. And the Gemara continues, Amrua Rabbanan Kame de Rava. The Rabbanan said this over in front of Rava. Some have the Girsa. They said it over in front of Rabba. Hadalok Rabbi Shimon. This does not seem to follow Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. The Ika Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon holds, Ha'amar, doesn't he say in our Mishnah, Mevi'im Kodshim leveis hapsul, that we are allowed to bring Kodshim to a situation of possible later disqualification, even if there's going to be a restriction of time. That's not a problem. That's what Rabbi Shimon said in our Mishnah. Amar Lahu, he said back to them, Afilu Tamer Rabbi Shimon. You could even say that this brisa does follow Rabbi Shimon, because Hani Mili Di'evid, because Rabbi Shimon was talking about a B'di'evid situation. That was the case of our Mishnah. The case of our Mishnah was things got mixed up, and Rabbi Shimon allows it. But L'chatchila lo, but he would not allow that L'chatchila, to take the money L'chatchila, again of Shvius, and use that to purchase Truma, that he would not allow. The Gemara says, well, L'chatchila lo, would he not allow it L'chatchila? Eisvei Abaya, Abaya asks the following question, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph.